Hello YouTubies, I'm Grant, this is the garage, this is Granty's garage, and in this video I'm going to show you how to change the brakes on a Porsche 986 or 996 specifically, but not on mine. As you can see, mine's not here. I've got Sean coming down, who's a subscriber and a mate from one of the groups. He's bringing his 986 and we're going to change the brakes on that. Stay tuned. To do this job, you will need whatever you use to lift the car and support it safely, a jack and some axle stands. Whatever you use to remove the wheels, and a torque wrench for putting the wheel, when you put the wheels back on, torquing them to spec. Now specifically for the pads, you will need a small tool for removing the retaining pin, a hammer and punches to push the larger pin out from the back of the caliper. This one has a very narrow long point, which is perfect. And some copper grease or copper slip is highly recommended for the reinstallation. For the discs, you do what we do to remove the pads, and you will then need either or both a 10mm hex for the caliper bolts if they're more original and older, or a T55 Torx for the newer versions. Ideally an impact driver for removing the screw in the disc that's holding it to the hub, or a Phillips screwdriver if you want to go the old school traditional way. Wire brush for cleaning stuff up, brake cleaner for cleaning the new discs. And now I'm going to share some of the bits that you might want to have. It's not essential because you can do it with any leverage, but a caliper rewind tool is very helpful. Your favourite penetrant fluid, and it's worth having a drill on hand just for being able to drill out any of the retaining screws that hold the disc on. They are very soft. You may find putting the screwdriver in it basically turns it to cream cheese, so having to drill them out, you might want to drill on hand just to be safe. And last but not least, a 10mm. That's just to remove the screw that is for the brake line bracket to give you more flexibility to move the caliper out of the way. Now, we've shown you what you're going to need to do the job tool-wise, and I want to make you two recommendations before you undertake this job. If you're doing either the pads or the discs, it's likely you've ordered pads and discs, and you probably have them ready to do the job. The other two things you should get, if you are going to be doing the discs specifically, I would highly recommend new caliper bolts. It came to light recently. There's an element of these to which they might stretch slightly when they go into the hub and when they're held, and some people consider these single use only. For the headache sometimes getting these out can be, replacing it with a fresh one is often the best course of action. They're pretty inexpensive, and possibly present, but certainly future you will thank you for doing that. So new caliper bolts, highly recommended. The other thing we'd highly recommend you have would be the brake disc screws. The ones that are in your car are likely going to be very soft. They're likely going to turn to cheese when you take them out, and it's nice to be able to know you can just drill those guys out and replace them with a new one. Now the first thing you'll need to do is jack up the wheel of the brakes you want to work on. I'm lucky enough to have one of these pucks that sits on a pinch seam, so I can lift it next to the jacking point and place the jack underneath. We've covered lifting these before on the channel, but Sean recommended I include the following tip if you want to get both the front wheels up at the same time. I do this by lifting the back jacking point of one side. This has then, because of the way the car's built, this will lift eventually the front wheel of the same side, and you can put the jack under. You can then move around the other side and then do the same. The car will prefer to roll rather than to tip, if you like, so working on the side you're trying to get the jack under is the way that you can achieve this. So here we are with the car up, both jacks under both front wheels. With the wheels off and at the front, you have the ability to obviously be able to turn them so you can face the caliper out. The first thing you do, use your little screwdriver or whatever you're using to take this retaining pin out of the larger pin. You then want to get your sort of narrow-ended punch or whatever you're going to use and start hitting it with a hammer until this pin moves out through the calipers, over the retaining clip, and then through the other pad ultimately. It's up to you the order you do this, but it was at this point as the retaining clip has been released from that pin, I decided to remove the first of the brake wear sensors from the outermost facing one. Now you can't see that much because of my head, but I released the wire at the top to give me a bit more slack, and you just pinch the two sides of it together and you lever it out. Once you have it out and the pin is out of the way, you'll see that the retaining clip comes out super easy. At this point, just to make life a little easier, I decided to get the caliper rewind tool, but you can use anything you want to get the leverage on these if your calipers are in good nick. And I pushed the calipers pistons back into them to create a bit more space. This is going to free up the outermost pad almost immediately. Just gives us a little bit more space for then accessing things like the other brake pad wear sensor. Getting the other sensor out is actually far easier when the pad is loose. So here I am just pushing the retaining pin the rest of the way out. It only needs to go as far as past the brake pad. And I'm just hitting it out with a different punch here. I filmed a lot of this in one shot, so I am sorry about my head being in the way, but I've pulled the other pad out, and that makes it a lot easier to get to the other side of where that sensor is, and then just pop it out. Now at this point, if you're only doing the pads, you simply wind the calipers back in, the pistons inside, either using some leverage or a rewind tool. You put some copper grease on the back of your new pads, and then you install them in the opposite way that we just removed these ones. Pads are done. Let's move on to doing the disc. For the disc to come off, the caliper needs to come off. The calipers on these are held by these two caliper bolts at the back. And as mentioned earlier, if they're the earlier versions, they're going to be a 10mm hex, which I'm using this Allen key for. And the newer versions will be a T55 Star Torx type piece. You just need to loosen these off and remove them. And it's always worth making sure you have something to support the caliper with so the brake line is not holding it. In this case, I use a bucket, but you can hang it off the spring using one of those bungee cords, or you can use a box. Then get your 10mm socket, and you can remove the small bolt that is just holding the bracket, holding the brake line to the hub to give you more flexibility to move the caliper. After some lunch, get yourself your impact driver or your screwdriver, and you can start looking to remove the retaining screws that hold these discs onto the hub. Here I am going at it with the impact driver, and it is not budging, and it is also destroying the screw because they are very soft, and the same thing happens for the bottom. Now this goes wrong in the respect that this doesn't work, they start turning into absolute cheese, and we need to move on to more invasive methods that we had the drill on hand for. I like that I'm able to show you this in a way where it doesn't always go as smoothly as everyone thinks it does on YouTube. This is the reality of doing this job. They're soft screws. So I try with a couple of different tools. They give up and they lose any ability for a screwdriver to take in them. So we then move on to plan B. And that would be Mr. Drill. Now the good thing is the access is great, and like I said, these are soft metal, so even these cheap bits that I've got and a regular drill will eventually work their way through. I start with one that is definitely smaller than the back end of the bolt, just really to start chewing off the heads so we can get to kind of the business end.
and just keep going with this until you're through. Just use a narrow drill bit that's smaller than the back of the screws. This is why you want to have the spare ones on hand. This isn't quick and it is a bit of a bugger, but once the head of the screws are off, the disc will come off, revealing what's left of the screw. And then a much thinner drill bit right through the middle normally does it. They'll start to disintegrate after that. And then you can just use a screwdriver and a hammer to poke it through. You can use a punch, or you can use a slightly larger drill bit to clean it out. Then you have the brake disc off. We can start looking at installing the next one. First thing to do with new brake discs, spray them down with brake cleaner to remove any oils or residues on it from the manufacturing and preservation process. And then you just wipe them off. And then for future, you get your copper grease, your copper slip, and just place some of that on the hub. And this will just make sure, or reduce the chances that the new disc is going to bind to the hub in the future. I just like to spread it on with the lolly stick with the forbidden Nutella. Then place the new disc onto the hub. Best you can, line up the holes by sight. The easiest way to do this is just pay attention to where the two holes for the retaining screws are, and then go and line it up with the lug nut holes. And I like to use either the pin you might hang the wheel on, or one or two of the lug nuts to actually just initially hold it in place for me to put the screws in. Once the retaining screws are in and the disc is on, we're at the point we're going to reinstall the caliper. What I'm doing here is I'm just taking a few of the pieces out, having a look at how dirty it is, and just generally going to give it all a bit of a clean up. I'll do this using brake cleaner, and I'll do it using a wire brush and a rag typically. We are now ready to reinstall the caliper, which is largely the taking it off in reverse. However, I always find it's a lot easier to go for the larger bolts holding the caliper on before the bracket that holds the brake line. So in this case, it's install the new caliper bolts, first of all by hand, just get them seated nicely, and then you just use the tools to whiz them in. With the caliper fully wound back, either by leverage or the tool, copper grease applied to the back of the pads so they're not going to bind in the future, and me with something weird on the back of my head, I'm just going to simply slip these in the same way, or the opposite to the way that we removed them. Then go ahead and reattach in the right position the bracket that holds the brake line with that 10mm on the hub. The next step is to get the brake pad wear sensor. In this case, the one that goes into the brake pad on the inside of the car, the furthest one away from you where you're doing this job, that's the only one you want to install at the moment. You just press it down and it will click into position. They're going to pick up that retaining clip. You put the hook side of it at the top of the caliper, because this hook is where the wire for the front pad sensor will run. And then it's going to be a case of banging this pin back into its position. Now, it's highly advisable. What I'm looking for here is the wire brush, which will be under the stool when I realise, is because I'm going to clean this pin up, and I'm going to put some copper grease on this as well, because this is going to help it not bind in the future, and it's just a good idea to take care of these components for next time you come to do this job. So brush found, I give it a clean up, and then also will put it in the drill and spin that over the brush just to give it a really good clean, remove any debris, rust, that sort of stuff, and then stick the copper grease on, and he's going to go back in. He has to go back in from the back of the caliper, because one end of it is slightly narrower, which is the end that faces outwards from the car, and it goes that end in first through the back, and then you knock it back into position. As you get to, and you'll see as this clip progresses, where it is about to cross where the retaining clip is, you want to just apply a little bit of a pressure to the retaining clip so that this pin will slide over the top of it. Once this is done, sorry my head is blocking it, the retaining pin that goes into that pin goes back in, and then just use something to press it down. Just make sure it clicks into place. Once that's done, you're done. And if you're doing all 4, you've only got 3 left. There you go.
So there you have how to replace the brakes on a 986 or a 996 Porsche. The video is going to become part of a playlist which I'm building, which is a library of how-to DIY videos for these cars. If you've got one, it would make sense to subscribe to the channel. There'll be a useful resource for you, I like to think. I like to add an element of this of reality, so it's not just somebody showing you how to do the job in ideal circumstances. We like to cover what might go wrong and the things you might have to overcome as a DIYer. The whole point of this is to make people feel more prepared and adequately prepared to do a job, and then hopefully not get stuck with it. If you've enjoyed that and you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Give it a thumbs up. If you can comment and engage with the video in any other way, big help to me. It means we can get the video out to more people that it might be able to help. And I'll see you in the next one.